Good evening, you're watching One Voice, brought to you by Asia One, and I'm Kerry Alexandra. Tonight we're going to take a look at the extraordinary way the war in Iran has played out online, possibly the biggest shift in public perception of war since the Vietnam War was the first conflict to be broadcast almost daily into people's homes in the mid-60s. We're going to look at the remarkable shift in tone from the White House.
Citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining.
The security situation in Afghanistan remains precarious. Even as they improve, Afghan security forces are still not as strong as they need to be. With our help, they're still working to improve critical capabilities such as intelligence, logistics, aviation, and command and control.
Situation with Iran is moving along very rapidly. It's doing very well. Our military is unsurpassed. There's never been anything like it. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And we're doing what has to be done. Should have been done during a 47-year period. Could have been done by a lot of different people. They chose not to do it. But they really are a nation of terror and hate, and they're paying a big price right now.
And the impact Donald Trump posting violent video game footage posing as foreign policy has had both on the American public support for the conflict.
Wake up, Daddy's home.
Welcome home, son.
Strength and honor. Strength and honor.
What will you do without freedom?
Maverick sent out.
You can't conceive of what I'm capable of.
Finishing this fight.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm back.
I'm here to fight for truth and justice in the American way.
I am the danger.
Time to find out.
Maximum effort. Here it comes.
And on the reaction from the rest of the world, with many usually staunch allies of the US refusing to get involved this time.
This is not our war and we're not going to get drawn into it. What we have done is taken defensive action. So we've had our pilots up in the air since an hour or two after this war started, defending British lives, British interests, and of course our allies in the region. We're allowing our bases to be used for defensive action to protect British lives and British interests and our allies in the region. And we are looking to see what we could do in the Straits of Hormuz, but we're not going to get dragged into this war.
And the equally surprising online output from the Iranian side, with satirical videos of Lego figures depicting the way they view the war and the US president and his government. As tensions have escalated between the United States and Iran, a parallel battlefield has emerged. It's become a conflict no longer confined to missiles, maritime warfare and boots on the ground, but also very much being played out online, with algorithms, viral videos and well-honed narratives being used to drive public support for the war, more effectively by some players than others. Driven by social media, digital influence and increasingly artificial intelligence, at the centre of this digital warfare is leadership and language. Donald Trump's use of direct, often provocative and even profane language has drawn global attention and wide-ranging criticism about how digital messaging from powerful figures can shape real-world conflict, and about the damage it's doing to the standing of the US on the world stage. Iran has taken a different, and it has to be said, equally surprising approach, combining the more traditional firm warnings and structured state-driven communication from serious-looking military and government figures with a wave of digital and narrative positioning of its own, in the shape of viral Lego videos that I, for one, would not have expected from the Iranian regime. To look in more depth at the way that AI, disinformation, cyber strategy and online influence campaigns are redefining what modern warfare looks like and just how powerful the public perception of conflict can be, I'm joined today from Washington by our US correspondent Tony Waterman, from Tehran by our Iran correspondent Mustafa Afzalzadeh, and by Asad Beg, a digital rights activist and founder of Media Matters for Democracy, on our first edition of the new OneVoice. So tonight we're asking, is this conflict being fought as much online as it is on the ground? Who is controlling the narrative, and does that control translate into real-world advantage? And are we witnessing not just a regional conflict escalating, but a shift in how global dominance itself is contested, and a shift in the old world order, perhaps? Tony, let's hear a US perspective first.
The war in Iran has played out unlike any other in global history, not on the ground, but online. The U.S. and Iran are using AI propaganda to fight a social media war. In the U.S., the White House has gamified and memeified this war in an unprecedented, some would say frightening and dehumanizing kind of way. It has really leaned into social media, at times treating strikes on Iran like a video game. And one of the most viral examples was the post to the official White House X account, splicing real-life bombing footage into Nintendo's Wii Sports golfing game, really designed to make military actions appear as high-score achievements, all while you have this very playful music as the backdrop. The White House has also used clips from blockbuster movies like Top Gun and Braveheart, mixing in strike footage and calling it Justice the American Way. In other cases, it's invoked cartoons and pop culture, and these videos have gotten tens of millions of views. But many Americans, including veterans, are horrified by them, calling them sickening and promoting a spectacle of violence. Critics say that this approach risks blurring the line between a deadly conflict and entertainment. It also trivializes the real human costs of war and could desensitize the public to those realities. The White House, though, has defended its use of social media. The press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, saying that the videos are designed to highlight the tremendous success the U.S. is having in this war, and argues that this kind of messaging reaches younger audiences and shape public opinion in a digital age. But for many, this has really fallen flat, and many argue that it's actually Iran that is winning this meme war with its Lego-style videos mocking U.S. leadership, including President Trump, as being a puppet of Israel. They've made reference to Trump's links to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and they've trolled Trump by questioning his mental acuity. Either way, this memification, this gamification, seems to be this next frontier in global war as both sides try to dictate the narrative. For the U.S., though, it's really a question of whether this dumbing down of war is below the country, which for centuries has been the shining city on a hill, and whether it can reclaim that title after the damage that has already been done.
Tony, thank you so much for joining us today. Really useful to have your perspective. We're joined now also from Tehran by our Iran correspondent, Mustafa Afzalzadeh. Thank you also so much for joining us. Let's start broadly. Are we now looking at two parallel conflicts, a physical one and a digital one? Mustafa, from an Iranian perspective, how do these two arenas influence each other in this current conflict between the US and Iran?
This is not the first time Iran is in a media war with United States and also other Western countries. It was our first experience besides the 12-day war that we had a military fight with the United States, but we have been through a media war from the start of the revolution for 4 decades. So regarding the time of war, the media war really affects the ground, the war ground. and it is very important. We can say that Iranians have been very good at the media war in the past 40 days. Lots of Western influence have been working in favor of Iran and against the war, and that has had a very big effect on the ground and on the pressure of the White House. We can say that many accounts have been suspended because of that, and that shows that it had a very good effect.
How significant is Donald Trump's approach to social media and his apparent unawareness of how wide of the mark his use of violent shoot-'em-up video game footage is? To discuss his somewhat erratic, to say the least, approach to foreign policy, how dehumanizing is it? I mean, we're talking about human lives here, and how much does this kind of unfiltered, unpresidential, and many would say unwise style of communication increase the risk of escalation?
Well, despite all the power that the United States has in the media, all that history and all that equipment and finance that they put in media, I have to say lying and big lies would affect on the opposite. I have two very good examples for that, and actually three examples. One is that when you search Iran on Google or any other search engines, you would see lots of bad images from Iran that they have tried to control the algorithms of the search engines against Iran. And that hasn't stopped people to find out more about Iran. The more they see harsh things, the more they get interested to dig in and find out more. One of the good examples is the 11th of September operation. They use this operation to ruin the image of the Muslims around the world. But again, there has been a very big tendency after that operations towards Islam in the United States. It means that it shows that how lying and big lies are having an opposite effect. The other example is the Gaza war. After the Gaza war and their media operations in favor of Israel added to the people in the streets and the support of people for the Palestinian people.
So looking now to Iran and their entirely different approach to social media warfare, if you will, because they have really shown how powerful it can be in both shaping and undermining a narrative and mobilizing public opinion, not just at home, but globally, which to a degree then influences both how the public react to their government's decisions and even how governments engage or don't engage in the conflict.
There are many government officials around the world that are affected by these mainstream media and social media, that giving them the right information by Iran and their allies and also their supporters around the world would very much affect their decisions. And also, if they're aware of what is happening in reality, it would give them a good excuse for not obeying and supporting United States on this war. Iranians have an example about this. When at the beginning of Islam, when the Muslims were under a lot of pressure, they went to the Ethiopian king at that time, very powerful king, to seek asylum, and they talked about Islam, saying how much Islam considers Jesus and Christianity, and that really helped the king to support them and not give them back to their enemies and the king of Saudi Arabia. Iran is trying to use the truth to awaken people and get much more support around the world. And we see that there are lots of contents created from independent influencers and activists around the world in social medias. And it's not possible for the United States to suspend all of that. One of the very good content created by the Iranians was the Lego. I'm sure many people have seen that the Lego stories that they made, and they had a lot of influence on the Western public opinion and has been saw in millions. I believe that Iran's the social media and activities that I would call asymmetric strategy, like what they have in the military, has been very successful, and it's going to really affect the midterm elections in the United States, and hopefully the presidential elections in the United States, and Iran hopes to get rid of that once forever.
So a hope for regime change from Iran as well as the US, you're telling us, Mustafa. Thank you for joining us today. Really useful to have you there on the ground in Tehran. I'm joined now by Asad Beg, digital rights activist and founder of Media Matters for Democracy. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let me start by asking you, what impact do you think the two very different approaches to social media messaging has had on the conflict and on public perception of it between the US and Iran?
I think in general, the role of social media has now become extremely important because it obviously it does the main job of messaging as we see, right? Also, it has one more job, which I think we've found out as a researcher working in this space, is that it also is used to garner some kind of political traction or to create some kind of political economy around a certain kind of narrative, right? So we saw that, for instance, in the Pakistan and India conflict in May in 2025, right? And we saw how the social media platforms were kind of used to convert, so to speak, the public, or kind of get them on board of a certain kind of narrative and so on. Because obviously, when we talk about demagogues, they have a massive following, right? Be it India or the US or anywhere else in the world, right? So, and most of their following is, in the modern world, it's driven by the social media platforms, like things like Twitter, for instance, and YouTube, and so on. And it's pretty much evident that when Trump himself was campaigning for elections the last time around, he focused on YouTube and podcasts and so on much more as opposed to the mainstream media. So kind of that dynamic plays in. And, I feel generally demagogues feel very comfortable with their messaging on the social media because that does not really give them or provide them any kind of friction or any kind of resistance, right? Because they have a certain kind of following and it's very easily kind of acceptable to the people. Whereas, let's say if this kind of messaging happens on the mainstream media, then people like you, the journalist, they will make sure that they pose as tough as questions that they can, right? So in that way, I feel in general, the role of social media has become really, it's a mixed bag, to be honest with you. On one side, obviously, there is direct messaging when we talk about politicians, when we talk about people who are making decisions and so on and so forth. You get to hear directly from them. But also that kind of information gatekeeping, which used to be there when the mainstream journalism or mainstream media was the key outlet for these kind of statements, that has also disappeared. So in that way, you get a lot of traction for any kind of aggression that you do on social media. You get a lot of praises. You get a lot of, even when you get resistance, you get some kind of traction. You know what I'm saying, right? So in that way, it has become very interesting now with the social media and, the war messaging and so on.
I think you're absolutely right. It's really interesting how leaders, some of them are just shouting into the void and there's no challenge, there's no journalist asking them why they're saying a thing. Let's bring artificial intelligence into this discussion a little bit now. How is AI being used in this conflict, whether through disinformation campaigns, deepfakes, predictive targeting, or psychological operations? And are we prepared for how fast that's evolving?
I think all of above, to be honest with you. I mean, I've written extensively on how AI-powered systems are used for automatic targeting of targets and so on, wherein obviously bringing in a lot of victims from the civilian side as well, right? And once again, there have been many researches over and over again how Israel, for instance, is weaponizing AI. Some of their systems are kind of completely seek to automate what we call the targeting systems and whatnot. So that's obviously, that dynamic is there. But there is another very interesting dynamic that probably we don't talk about much, is how the algorithms of the social media platforms are working in terms of amplifying one certain message or one kind of message, right? Now, there are many, many dynamics, and I don't want to say, and neither am I saying that Meta, for instance, or any of the social media companies kind of intentionally want to amplify a certain kind of voice, let's say in the US or anywhere in the world, but there have been evidences in the past. For instance, in the election of 2016, the American election, we saw that there was a lot of disinformation coming from Macedonia in the favor of Trump. It doesn't make sense, right? But Macedonian youth in that time, they kind of figured out that if they create content for Trump, it sells more in the US. So in that way, although they had zero political connection or inclination with Trump or any kind of American politics, but they were mainly creating content to kind of amplify it. And in that way, they were earning money out of it, right? So in that way, there are many, many dynamics. And algorithms are obviously powered by AI. And that is very interesting because they are all black box systems. So we don't know what's happening in them. The only thing we know is that one, AI is learning from where it gets the maximum engagement. And now this is where the tricky part lies. Maximum engagement is ensured only by aggression on social media. And once again, many researchers have been done on this. The more angry you are, the more hateful you are, the more traction and the more engagement, quote unquote, is generated on social media. So in some way or another, AI algorithms have learned that this is how you get engagement. And so in the process, they amplify any aggression, any kind of, anything in that way that they feel can really amplify, the engagement. And most of the times, that's hateful content, exactly.
There's a growing concern that in digital warfare, truth becomes secondary to narrative. Who do you think is currently winning the narrative war, and why, between the two sides in this conflict?
Oh, that's very difficult to say. I have to say, and I have to kind of comment on the Iranian humor, which is a rather new thing for us. We never knew that this kind of humor could exist, in a wartime scenario, specifically when very serious messaging is being done. But that kind of it also shows you what kind of degradation we are talking about when it comes to serious messaging. And once again, not to blame any one side. But that's apparently the thing which sells online, right? So both of the parties, I suppose, have learned that any kind of serious messaging that they probably do from CNN or BBC or your channel, for instance, will probably get much, much less traction as opposed to memes online on TikTok, on Facebook, and so on. And so that kind of degradation, humor is one side of it, but that kind of degradation in the general quality of communication, specifically on something as serious as wartime, right? That really is problematic. Now, probably the American media didn't do the best of its job when the US Army invaded, let's say, Iraq or Afghanistan in the early 2000s. But still, there was very serious reporting happening. You get to know about things, and the many like human rights violations, for instance, were uncovered in that time as well by serious journalists, right? My concern is that kind of serious debate, which used to happen, is now happening in silos. And probably a massive majority of the people who are consuming content are consuming the war content or war messaging through memes or things like statements that kind of stick, like Trump's statement, for instance, that a whole civilization is going to end, and so on and so forth, right? So that kind of impact, which the social media companies, obviously, with their AI-powered algorithms, once again, not to say the social media companies are inherently evil, but the kind of algorithms that they have learned from the human engagement, that is extremely problematic, and that's my main concern.
Really interesting to hear your perspective today. Thank you so much for joining us on One Voice. It seems that wars are no longer won or lost on the ground as we watch both the United States and Iran employ social media and AI to control the narrative and influence public opinion. The question is no longer just who has the bigger military, but who controls the story, because in a digital age, a message can travel as fast as a missile and sometimes with consequences just as lasting. You've been watching One Voice on Asia One. I'm Kerry Alexandra. Join us again next time as we look at the stories behind the headlines.